So, welcome to the podcast, Mark. I'm so glad to have you here.
I'm very pleased to be here. It's interesting. I've been doing my own podcast for a few months, not as long as yours, but it's interesting to be on the other end here. I'm used to being in the host shoes.
Yeah, I've been on both ends of the interviewer, and then been on and been interviewed, and it is a little bit of a different dynamic, but it's a conversation.
Exactly,
Um,
exactly.
wow. I think I want to start out, and when I say wow, just looking at all that you've accomplished, all that you've done. I know you've got a new book out, and I want to talk about that as well. But for the listeners, like I could do my own little, like, okay, this is Mark Lesser, but I'd actually like to hear from you. Like, who's Mark Lesser? Like, because I wouldn't know what to actually pinpoint and highlight because there's so much there. So,
Yeah, I'm happy. To yeah. It's always I've told my, again, I can do the, anywhere from the 1 minute version to the 5 minute or longer versions of, uh, yeah, it's kind of amazing. This, I feel both surprised and rather privileged in this life. And I'm here, I'm not, this is not where I'm usually perched. I
okay.
am in Missoula, Montana. My daughter just had a baby son, so
Oh, wow.
my wife and I are here supporting, being supportive parents.
Awesome. And you're based out of California, though, correct?
I'm usually just north of San Francisco.
Just north of San Francisco. One of the things, I mean, aside from just all the executive coaching you've done and the, leadership training with a lot of big companies. I mean, Google, for just, if we're just going to name drop one of them. But then I thought it was interesting too about your Zen monastery that you opened.
Yes, my 1 year leave of absence from Rutgers that turned into 10 years at the Zen Center, including 5 years living in a monastic life, and my parents not thrilled about that, as you can imagine, but how that ended up being the springboard for so much of what I've been able to do.
Sure, sure. So, um, I really, so I was interested when you had reached out about your new book because of what I do as a mediator, dealing with people that are always in conflict. I like to refer to myself as I sit in the friction of life.
Mhm.
Because I mean, intentionally, I sit in the friction just between two people that are having issues.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's business, most of the time it's personal, it's family related, and whatnot. But then all of the people that I'm dealing with, of course, are dealing with their own friction. They're dealing with their own relationships and whatnot. And looking through your bio, I thought it was interesting that you had brought emotional intelligence training to Google. And I've done a little bit, probably nowhere close to what you've done. I've done a little bit of training on emotional intelligence, which I have found fascinating. But in that, I read that, that you had said that you can actually learn a lot about dealing with difficult people by simply being still and looking inward.
Mhm.
Can you
Mhm.
elaborate on that a little bit?
I see. Are we recording? Are
Yeah,
we on?
yeah,
Okay. Yeah, I think all healthy relationships, and especially as you were saying, working whenever it's uncomfortable, the most obvious starting point is to be curious about your own discomfort. Whereas the tendency, as you know, as a mediator, is I think we are actually wired in some way, both wired and reinforced, to go right to blame, to go right to what is it about the other? Instead of looking at the way in which, to some degree, we're always creating our own reality, our own worlds, we're generating our own emotions. And like, imagine that. I mean, even, you know, uh, uh, I often get asked, how do we work? How do I work with those difficult people? And I immediately wonder, are you one of those difficult people? Or in some, we are all difficult people in some situations to some other people.
Yeah.
So that to me, that question is such a giveaway that the person is not asking the right question generally. Like,
Yeah.
of course, there are toxic people. There are,
Sure.
and we should have, but mostly those day-to-day, uncomfortable situations are one where, yeah, as you just asked about, starting by stopping and being curious about your own emotions is a really skillful, useful way to begin.
Yeah. Well, and as a mediator, I find, and I'm in South Florida, so we are a melting pot, similar to California, New York, where, we've got Caribbean, we've got South American, we've got, we're just going to call New York their own, right? But we've got so many different cultures that we've got religious beliefs, political beliefs, cultural beliefs. And when you start mixing all that together, I find, as a mediator, a lot of times I just sit and listen. I'm, trying to actually listen to not what is being said, but why is it being said? And is it a cultural belief, or is it something that maybe was ingrained as a child just because they're a product of their parents?
Mhm. Yeah.
Um, and so much of that is just listening. And, as much as I'm there, sometimes I'm there to facilitate. So I'm having to really talk and whatnot. But then sometimes it's just listening and letting the two people work things out, discuss. And I'm like looking for those pieces to figure out, why, what's going on behind the scenes.
Yeah, no, totally. You pointed out the, kind of ethnic and cultural differences, but even people that come from, what looks like very similar backgrounds, our own, the way that we deal with conflict, the way that we deal with different emotional issues, the way that we deal with the underlying stories, sometimes the trauma. Um, I think the mistake that we make is that we assume that everyone is from our planet. I sometimes like that language that
Yeah.
we all come from our own planet in terms of how we see the world and how we process information, and where we get in trouble is assuming that everyone else, they must come from our planet, and then we spend time trying to convince them that they should be on our planet, and it doesn't usually work so well.
Yeah.
um, yeah, I mean, I see that a lot of the work that I do is in the business world, and I see people in meetings not hearing each other. And I can almost see, I sometimes visualize their parents behind them, scolding them or not appreciating them. And just, yeah. So even back to your original question about starting by stopping, starting by, noticing all of the, what are we bringing into this conversation that might be getting in the way of actually listening,
Yeah.
hearing, connecting. Do we want to connect? Is our intention? Are we intending even to listen, or are we just there to be right?
Yeah. Well, and I saw that in myself even. Um, 2020 got us in a lot of trouble. um, because, by being isolated, everybody's voice was liquid courage through the internet. And everybody was voicing their opinions, including myself, to the point where I kept getting put in Facebook jail, assuming that everybody thought that I was right and I saw things right. And then, of course, then you find out that there's so much satire, so much misinformation, and all the conversations. And that really led to a huge division of an us versus them. Similar, like you're saying, like, this is our planet, that is your planet. Well, you're going to be part of my planet or get off my planet. Well, that doesn't work when we're actually all on the same planet, does it?
Yeah, yeah. Well, this is, the first chapter in my new book, Finding Clarity, is called "Be Curious, Not Furious."
Oh, I love
And,
that.
I think everyone that should be sewn into all of our clothing,
Be
So,
curious, not furious.
yeah, I mean, uh, anytime we're angry again, whether it's, stuck in traffic or, someone cuts us off or someone gives us, says something, and we notice that our tendency is to react, to
Yeah,
respond. And anger can come up, anger
yeah,
or frustration. Yeah, so to be curious, to start with curiosity about, oh, wow, isn't that's interesting.
yeah.
I often know because I teach this stuff. I teach, emotional intelligence. Of course, I'm not afraid of saying that my wife thinks it's hilarious that I'm teaching emotional intelligence.
That's like
Uh,
my wife thinks it's hilarious that I'm mediating.
right, right. But just uh, just to start with, yeah, curiosity about, oh, I often, as I see myself getting angry or frustrated, saying, oh, I'm doing that thing that I'm often advising other people not to do. That's interesting.
Sure,
I wonder what that's about.
sure. Yeah, when I got divorced many, many years ago, usually the one closest to you knows your buttons, probably better even than you know your own buttons. And so my ex knew my buttons, and she knew what to say, how to say it, when to say it to get a reaction. And people used to say to me all the time, Matthew, you're very angry. To which I would say, no, I'm not. Right. So finally, I mean, like even my kids were like, Dad, settle down. Like, what's wrong? So I decided, you know what? After trying to change her for years, and of course that didn't work and we got divorced, I finally, like you said, without even understanding the emotional intelligence, without understanding stop and look inward, I actually just stopped and look inward. So the first my very first online education type thing was I took the court ordered anger management program. It was 11 weeks long. Mark, I learned what my buttons were. And when I
Mhm.
learned, like, why does this set me off? Why do I react in this way? How should I actually respond? And once I looked inward and figured out who am I? What makes me tick? What drives me? What sets me off? All of a sudden, it really changed how I was able to relate not only to my ex, but to my kids and the world around me. And for years now, I mean, for what, 15, 16 years, I have recommended that to almost every single client that I've had in mediation, going, just take it. It will change your life because it really is that stop and look inward. It's that assessment of who are you and how do you then, either react or respond to those around us.
Mhm. Yeah, especially to notice, like as you're saying, what our anger triggers are, but then also, the other side of that is what causes us to close down, what
Yeah,
causes us to shut down.
yeah,
Those are the two things
yeah,
that drive other people crazy,
yeah,
and that get us in trouble in whether it's our marriages or I think of a coaching an executive that I've been working with whose trigger is when he feels that someone on his team is being incompetent, he goes from being curious to interrogating.
okay,
So it's an interesting. So
yeah,
and he was just totally unaware that he had this trigger
sure,
about, like, competence. And that's a pretty common one in the work world because we all want to be competent,
sure,
right? So, what do we do when we feel that someone is looking at us, questioning our competence, or if we're in a leadership role, if we feel like someone isn't being competent, and we suddenly are uh, going from being their mentor to being their interrogator.
yeah. Yeah, I refer to mentor to tormentor.
Exactly.
So, so I, I guess my next question is, so when when we start labeling, people as difficult people, not just, the behaviors that are difficult, and then, as we're talking, that may anger us or may trigger us like in a past hurt, like it brings up a hurt that we may have. Then we start to judge someone's entire character, like they. It's they. And it's not separating the behavior from the person. We just tend to label the person, right?
Yeah. There's a beautiful, I think, a useful rule of thumb that you know, we judge ourselves by our intentions. We judge others by the impact their intentions have on us.
Wow.
Right? Right. We're good people. We're
Yeah.
good people. We're trying our best. But as soon as there's an ouch, someone does something and there's
Yeah.
an ouch, they're a bad person.
Yeah.
What is their underlying motivation?
Yeah.
We question their motivation. That's that, again, it's a core uh, emotional intelligence competency of knowing the difference between impact and intention, right? That anytime the impact of someone's words is like an ouch, to be curious about their intention. Not
Yeah.
we go right. This is again, I think we're wired for blame. We're wired that
Yeah.
we have to be we protect our, it's a protection
Sure.
mechanism.
Sure. It's interesting. My wife and I went through that for the first number of years that we were dating, and then we got married, and just sort of learning each other. And it finally came, and we're both in the legal world. She's been a paralegal forever. I've been a mediator. Um, so we both come from this legal world. So what was interesting was, we finally had to come to that realization that, look, she may do something, she may say something, but it's not out of malice. And that, it's a legal word. We're like, it's not intentional to hurt. It's not, I'm saying this to get her. I'm saying this because I love you. And when we start to look from a different perspective, which I think you're talking, looking inward and going, okay, they're not out to get me. They're actually watching out for me. Then it changes the entire dynamic of the conversation.
Mhm. Yeah, and I think to understand, I spent many years teaching emotional intelligence to Google engineers, and one of them uh, was this amazing scientist who he used to often say that we humans are descendants of the nervous apes, that our descendants who were chill and cool, they all got killed. It was the ones who were really adept at scanning for threats.
Right.
So we are, evolution, we've evolved to stay alive, And in order to stay alive, scanning for threats is a really, really important quality to have. So,
Survival of the fittest.
it's well, survival at,
Yeah.
especially, and I think it's interesting. I think it's those external threats, as you were describing with your former wife, but also I think it's those internal threats that we're always looking, am I okay? How am I, am I being seen as good and competent? That
Yeah.
there's that scanning that happens, and this is part, I think, of that, you know, it's easy, it's an easy throwaway statement. Oh, look within, but no, like become become more curious and familiar with, oh, what is that process? How am I scanning for threats? We all do it. It's part of our makeup.
Yeah. And I think, when I'm sitting in mediation and trying to help, either a mother or father or husband and wife, you know, none of that is present. It's, finger blaming, they did this, therefore it caused this. And it's like, okay, but
Right.
what role did you play?
Right.
Like they didn't just do it on their own. Like what role? And I've found a lot of times with infidelity, that, okay, well, what caused them to go look in the first place?
Yeah.
Like, nobody's leaving a happy home. Like, if it's a happy home, why are you even looking anywhere? Like, okay, but and of course that's inward, and that's uncomfortable for a lot of people.
Yeah. In those situations, I like to ask the question, were you maybe 1% responsible?
Yeah.
Two, anything, is there even a whiff of that you might have had something to do with this? This is a relationship. This is a situation. It's rarely 100% them.
Yeah. Well, and I guess as I've gotten older and been doing this for so long, and my kids are now much older, and finally got through my own craziness and whatnot, I finally got to a point, and I share this all the time, with clients, but I've gotten to the point where the relationship to me is much more important than being right. But that is take it again, looking inward, going, look, I don't have to be right. It's not about pride. It's not about ego. I actually, and it's not that, oh, you can just walk all over me. It's that, no, you know what? I pick and choose my battles, and you know what? I don't have to be right. I'll be wrong all day long. I just want the relationship. And it used never to be that way. Like, I had to have the final word. I had to try to convince you of my point of view, just like you said, like, this is my planet.
Yeah.
Um, but it's been changing. As I get older, going, I just really desire the relationship, and if that means that I have to say I'm sorry, fine.
Yeah.
And it's not
Yeah.
a manipulation thing. Again, it's not that I'm just rolling over and I'm just an easy pushover. It's that, look, I'm changing that. I'm changing, like, I'm looking inside of who am I, what makes me tick, and I actually desire relationship more than I care about proving my point.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's interesting. I think we go, that the proving one's point is kind of an ego thing.
Oh yeah, yeah,
And those ego things are not very good for building sustainable, intimate, quality relationships.
yeah,
As we at some point, and I think it happens at different times in our lives, our priorities shift and
yeah,
we realize that, boy, relationships are really important.
yeah.
I mean, even especially our closest relationships, but even in the work world, it's all
Absolutely.
everything. And they might be different than friends relationships, but those working relationships are all about trust and
Yes.
connection and the more
Negotiations,
and
compromise.
yeah. And I think this is actually a new realization, a relatively new realization, that I think much of the work world structure was a kind of rooting out humanness, right? This assumption that humanness and emotions bad gets in the way.
Yeah,
Now, because of the way that we're working and the level of collaboration, what it takes to build stuff, whether it's software or airplanes or hamburgers,
yeah,
um, that working together, that there is a clear relationship for the quality of relationships and effectiveness and production. Like,
yeah,
wow, like who
yeah.
would have thought?
We can get so much more done if we actually just work together. I mean, there is actually, I mean, and I think this goes back to, just stopping and looking inward. Is there's more if we actually, I think if we actually pay attention, there's more that unites us than divides us.
Mhm.
But sometimes we can walk into a room and find the one or two things that didn't get done, not the 98% that did get done. And there's so much that just in a normal conversation, it's like we could actually have in common. And if we look to that commonality, we can be more productive, whether it's like you said, a personal relationship, a work relationship, business. We can just get more done.
Yeah, yeah. Many years ago, I was involved in some kind of mediation with Arabs and Jews.
Okay.
And they walked in, these two groups walked into the room and they hated each other's guts,
Sure.
right? Bad people, bad, horrible people. But as soon as they started talking about their children, and that it was like it was amazing to see that a little bit of humanity and commonality and those ideas that they had
Yeah.
been brainwashed with over a lifetime started to loosen,
Yeah.
and they could feel those connections. And
Yeah, I did a course with Dr. Josh Weiss. He was one of the two men that actually created the Abraham Path over in the Middle East through Harvard's program on negotiation, and fascinating work. Like I said, I did the Abraham Path. I was supposed to go over to Jordan and do a section of the Abraham Path with him. But of course, COVID came, they had to cancel. They haven't been able to reopen Jordan and do that, but they did a virtual version. And it was really, really fascinating learning, how, he was one of two people that actually was able, like you said, to find that commonality between the Israelis, the Palestinians, the Arabs, and figure out, okay, what commonality? We've got Father Abraham. We both acknowledge Abraham as our father. Okay, well, how do we then build, a safe space? How do we build up our countries? How do we build tourism? How do we help both of you, even though you have differences? And they were able to then, find that commonality, whether it was historical documents, the Quran, the Bible, and go, okay, here's the path that Abraham, who we all have in common, they found that commonality, and let's figure out, okay, let's trace his path through the Middle East from birth to death, and now let's create a path, and it's a safe zone that all the countries come around and say, okay, we're going to not deal with, not let anybody get hurt, protect everybody. This is a safe place. And it's crazy. It's crazy that it's worked.
yeah.
Like you said, it's that commonality.
For more information about my services or to schedule your mediation with me, either in person or using my iChat mediation virtual platform built by Cisco Communications, visit me online at iMediateinc.com. Call me at 561-262-9121, toll free at 877-822-1479, or email me at mbrickman@iChatmediation.com.